Finally, the last few things you need to know before you do the checkup is that a quadratic equation is a second degree equation. A quadratic equation means, or it being a second degree equation means that it has, one of its variables has a exponent to the second power. That's why it's second degree, because one of its variables has an exponent to the second power. So a quadratic equation is a second degree equation. The other thing you need to know is that a complete quadratic equation contains both the second power and the first power of the unknown, meaning that the variable has that it has two variables. One has the second power and one is raised to the first power. A complete quadratic equation has two variables. One of them is raised to the second power and the other one is raised to the first power. That's what makes it a complete quadratic equation. An incomplete quadratic equation contains only the second power of the unknown. So these two are examples of an incomplete quadratic equation. It only has one variable and it's raised to the second power. It doesn't have another variable raised to the first power. So an incomplete quadratic equation only has one variable raised to the second power. So these are both examples of an incomplete quadratic equation, because although this equation has two terms, the second term is not a variable raised to the first power, it's a number. And the only variable that it has is raised to the second power. There's no variable raised to the first power. That's why it's an incomplete quadratic equation, because there is no variable raised to the first power. And the last thing you need to know is that most quadratic equations have two roots, okay? So when I find x, I'm going to use the radical function to find x. I'm going to square root both sides. So the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 9 is plus or minus 3, okay? It has two roots, a positive 3 and a negative 3. That's what this is saying. Most quadratic equations have two roots, a plus 3 and a negative 3. Because negative 3 times negative 3 equals 9, and positive 3 times positive 3 equals 9. So the two roots are a negative 3 and a positive 3. So remember these rules, and you should do great on the checkup.